The tires crunched against the frozen layer of snow as we rounded the final curve. And that was when the cabin finally came into view. The timing felt cinematic, the sun slipping behind the rugged mountains just as the house appeared. It was exactly like the pictures I had studied online. A quaint little retreat nestled among the trees, their branches artfully hiding the worn-out roof that should have been replaced years ago. Some might call it charming. I wanted to believe it was charming. More than anything, I wanted Claire to see it that way too. "This is it?" I said, injecting my voice with forced enthusiasm as I eased the car into the narrow driveway. Claire stayed silent, her eyes glued to her phone, thumb moving lazily over the screen. The faint glow illuminated her face in the growing dusk. "Nice, huh?" I tried again, louder this time. She lifted her head just enough to glance at the cabin. Her eyes lingered for a split second before darting back to her phone. "It's fine," she said, her tone flat. I turned off the engine and gripped the steering wheel for a moment longer than necessary. Fine. Everything between us had become just fine these days. The wind greeted me with an icy slap as I stepped out of the car, its sharp edge cutting through my jacket. Overhead, the sky hung heavy and gray, snow falling in lazy spirals that hinted at a more serious storm brewing. I paused, taking in the scene. The cabin stood on the mountainside like a relic from another time, with the winding road we had driven still visible below, weaving through the forest like a fragile thread. Just before the driveway, the road had split, one path leading back to town. Now, silence replaced the familiar hum of city life. No cars, no voices, just the rising howl of the wind and the hushed whisper of falling snow. The kind of quiet that feels like a weight pressing down, making it hard to tell if the world is holding its breath, or if you are. I glanced back at Claire, still in the passenger seat. Her face was no longer lit by her phone, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she was admiring the view. But her expression wasn't one of wonder, it was disappointment. "Can you grab your bags?" I asked, leaning down to look at her through the open door. She sighed, the sound just loud enough to make her frustration clear, then climbed out of the car. Pulling her coat tight against the cold, she muttered, "It's freezing. It's Colorado in December," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "What were you expecting? Sunshine and palm trees?" No reaction. The cabin door resisted as I pushed it open, the wood swollen from years of battling the elements. Inside, a faint scent of pine mingled with the unmistakable musk of age and neglect, a reminder of our cramped apartment back home. The floors groaned with every step, their creaks softened by faded rugs. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while the modest kitchen on the left looked functional despite its outdated appliances. A narrow hallway stretched to the right, lined with dust-covered knickknacks and cheap framed art that had seen better days. "Cozy, right?" I said, setting our bags down by the door. Claire brushed past me without a word, collapsing onto the couch. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and resumed scrolling, her body sinking into the cushions like she had just completed a marathon. "I'll get the fire going," I mumbled, mostly to myself. The fireplace looked like it had not been touched in years, soot blackening the edges. A neat stack of logs and kindling waited nearby, and after a few failed attempts with damp matches, I managed to coax a small flame to life. Warmth slowly seeped into the room, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. "Better?" I asked, looking over at Claire. She glanced up briefly, offered a half-hearted nod, and went right back to her phone. Her screen's persistent glow made me wonder how she still had a signal in a place this remote. I busied myself with unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with every passing moment. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, the wind rattling the windows as the storm gained strength. The cabin let out a low groan, the kind of sound that makes you think the house itself is alive, creaking under the weight of snow piling on the roof. "Good thing this place has character," I said, breaking the silence. Claire ignored me, sighing, I dropped onto the couch beside her. Look, Claire, I know this trip is not exactly your idea of fun, but I am tired, she interrupted, standing abruptly. I am going to bed. Claire! She was already halfway down the hall, her footsteps sharp against the old floorboards. The bedroom door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the fire and the howling wind outside. I leaned back, watching the flames dance. Pulling a blanket from my bag, I spread it across the couch. Her words from days ago echoed in my mind. Maybe it would be best if you slept on the couch tonight. The cabin groaned again, the sound setting my nerves on edge. I glanced at the window, where the blizzard had taken full command. Cold air seeped in from under the door, and I knew there was no chance of driving out in the morning. It was going to be a long night. I poured a cup of coffee, only to find it lukewarm. Claire must have been up for hours already, her untouched mug still sitting on the table. The storm seems to be dying down, I said, leaning casually against the counter. How about we take a walk later, get some fresh air and stretch our legs? She made a non-committal sound, a sort of hum that was neither agreement nor refusal. Her posture, though, told me everything I needed to know. Legs curled beneath her, shoulders slightly hunched. It was not hostility exactly, but it was far from inviting. I watched her for a while, my coffee cooling further in my hands. My thoughts drifted back to the words she had flung at me during our last fight, the ones that still stung every time I remembered them. If you want to plan that stupid anniversary trip, go for it. You never care what anyone else wants anyway. I exhaled slowly and turned away, trying to swallow my frustration. That was when I heard it. A faint sound, barely there, like the ghost of a whisper carried on the wind. I froze, tilting my head toward the hallway to listen. It was so quiet I wondered if I had imagined it, like the hum of an old appliance or a distant, muffled voice. Do you hear that? I asked. Hear what? Claire's tone was sharp, but she glanced toward the hallway, her expression briefly softening into curiosity. That noise. It sounds like singing? Or maybe someone talking. She frowned. It's just the wind, she said dismissively. Maybe, I muttered, though the explanation did not sit well with me. We finished our coffee in silence, rinsing our mugs and setting them in the sink. Once we would have washed the dishes together, chatting about whatever crossed our minds. Now we barely spoke. The absence of a dishwasher somehow made the divide between us feel even wider. As I laced up my boots, Claire shuffled back toward the bedroom without a word, making no move to join me. You coming with me, sweetheart? I asked, keeping my tone light. The storm's letting up. A walk might do us some good. She paused, her voice muffled as she spoke through the cracked door. It will be easier for both of us if we do not have to pretend. Go on your walk. I will stay here. Something inside me snapped. You think I am the one making this harder than it needs to be? My voice rose, sharp and bitter. You are impossible to talk to, Claire. Her response came in the form of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, followed by the sound of the door slamming shut. The cabin groaned as if echoing the tension between us, the wind outside momentarily masking the faint murmuring sound from the hallway. But the noise did not go away. All day, it lingered on the edge of my awareness. Quiet, persistent, and oddly familiar. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than wind sneaking through a crack in the walls or maybe a small animal nesting somewhere. Still, it gnawed at me, keeping my nerves on edge. Dinner was a mostly silent affair. The canned pasta on our plates matched the mood, bland and unappetizing. Claire toyed with her food, barely eating, while the tension between us loomed like a storm cloud. Is it bothering you? I finally asked, breaking the silence. Her eyes flicked up, startled. What? The noise, I clarified. Does it not bother you? She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. I do not hear anything. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died on my lips. I had learned the hard way that pushing her when she was like this never ended well. I finished my meal in silence, the faint sound still gnawing at the edges of my mind. Later, as we cleared our plates, the wind outside stilled for the first time since we had arrived. With the quiet came the realization. The noise was louder now, impossible to ignore. Claire froze, her head tilting toward the hallway. "You hear it," I said, unable to hide the triumph in my voice. She rolled her eyes. "Fine, I hear it. But it is nothing. Just this old cabin falling apart." She started toward the hallway, and I assumed she was heading to bed. I moved toward the couch, resigned to another night alone, when she stopped and glanced back at me. With a small sigh, she gestured for me to join her in the bedroom. I wasted no time grabbing my blanket from the couch, relief flooding through me as I followed her. For the first time in what felt like forever, I climbed into bed beside her, the warmth of the room finally matching the faint hope flickering inside me. As I drifted off to sleep, my dreams took me back to our wedding day. It was strange, really, how a trip meant to celebrate our 5th anniversary was the first time I had thought about that moment in years. In the dream, I stood at the altar, my hands clasping hers. Her palms were cold and clammy, her expression distant. I tried to picture a future where we could find happiness, but her scowl cut through the image like a blade, leaving nothing behind but emptiness. The dream replayed in vivid fragments, the minister's voice echoing through the ceremony, asking if anyone objected. Then, from the crowd, a voice rang out, a desperate, familiar cry. I turned to see Claire standing there, or someone who looked exactly like her. She was radiant, dressed in the sweater she'd worn on our first date, her expression alight with the warmth I'd fallen in love with. Jason, I love you. Please, don't do this," she called, her voice thick with urgency. I glanced back at the bride beside me, and my stomach lurched. Her skin had grown sallow, stretched tight over hollow cheekbones. Her eyes were sunken, the light gone from them. She raised my hand to her side, guiding it to something warm and wet. Blood seeped through the fabric of her gown, staining the white with deep crimson. I woke in a cold sweat, my breath coming in short gasps. The sound was louder now, distinct and inescapable. Not static exactly, but uneven and distorted, like voices filtered through a bad connection. Sitting up, I strained to listen, my heart thundering in my chest. Beside me, Claire stirred, her voice thick with sleep. "Jason, do you hear that?" I whispered. She froze, her brow furrowing as she strained to listen. It wasn't faint anymore. The sound was clear. Rushed, garbled speech interspersed with static. The words indistinguishable but undeniably there. "Is that a radio?" she asked, sitting up. "I think so." I swung my legs out of bed, already moving toward the door. We followed the noise into the hallway, our footsteps creaking against the old wooden floor. The sound grew louder as we approached the end of the hall, where a pull-down attic door sat flush with the ceiling. "What the hell?" Claire muttered, eyeing it warily. I reached up, grabbing the rope to tug the ladder down. The mechanism groaned but didn't move. Shining her phone's flashlight upward, Claire revealed the problem. A small 4-digit padlock secured the attic door shut. The noise, now a steady hum interspersed with faint bursts of garbled voices, was unmistakable. "You think the owners left a radio on up there?" I asked. "Maybe," she said, though her tone carried doubt. "We should call them." I fished out my phone and dialed the number from the Airbnb listing. It went straight to voicemail. Leaving a message, I tried to sound calm but insistent, asking them to address the issue as soon as possible. Claire's expression darkened as I hung up. "So what now? We just live with it." "I don't know what else to do," I admitted. "I'm not about to smash the lock and pay for damages." Her shoulders tensed, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "How are we supposed to sleep with that racket going on?" I ran a hand through my hair, irritation flaring. What do you want me to do, Claire? Break in? I'm trying here. Don't start, she snapped, her eyes narrowing. I'm not starting anything. I shot back, the tension between us erupting into sharp words. Without another word, she turned and stormed back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood in the dim hallway, staring up at the locked attic door. The static buzzed in my ears, louder and almost rhythmic now, as if it were waiting for something. The next morning, I found Claire in the kitchen, standing stiffly by the counter. Her arms were crossed, and an untouched mug of coffee sat beside her. This time, she wasn't scrolling through her phone. She just stared out the window, her expression unreadable. The sound hadn't stopped. It had quieted briefly in the early morning hours, but now it was back. Faint, persistent, filling the house with an oppressive tension. You didn't sleep, did you? I asked, keeping my tone even. She glanced at me from the corner of her eye. Hard to sleep with a radio running all night. I tried calling the owner again, I said, leaning against the doorway. Still nothing. What do you want me to do? Smash the lock and risk paying for damages? Her shoulders stiffened, and I could feel the argument building before she even spoke. It's not just the noise, Jason, she said, turning to face me fully. It's the voices. They're faint, I said, brushing her concern aside. Probably just some talk show. You don't know that, she snapped, her voice rising. It's creepy. It's weird. And you're acting like it's normal. I'm not saying it's normal, I shot back, my patience wearing thin. But I'm not going to lose it over a busted radio in an old house. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. You're always like this, dismissing me, making me feel like I'm crazy for being upset. Like it's my fault I can't just relax like you. That's not fair, I said, my jaw tightening. You're acting like I planted the damn radio there just to mess with you. Maybe you didn't, but you sure as hell aren't doing anything about it. Before I could respond, the static flared, sharp and insistent. A voice broke through, loud and clear. You think I'm the one making this harder than it has to be? You're impossible to talk to, Claire. I froze. Claire's face paled, her lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. The voice was mine. Claire's eyes widened, her face pale as she stared at me. Did you hear that? I hesitated, my thoughts spinning. It's nothing. Probably just... Don't, she interrupted, her voice trembling. Don't tell me that wasn't you. It wasn't me, I said firmly, though even I didn't believe it. Her breath caught, her voice rising. Jason, that was exactly what you said to me yesterday. The static wavered, and then the voice resumed. This time faint but unmistakably mine. Stop putting this all on me, Claire. You're just imagining things. I didn't go anywhere tonight. I stepped back, my stomach knotting. It wasn't just the words, it was the cadence, the tone. It was me. Claire's hands trembled as she pressed them to her forehead. It's you, she whispered, her voice sharp and brittle. You're doing this. You're trying to mess with me. Do you think it's funny? What? No. I snapped, my voice rising. Claire, how could I even? You've been trying to fix this trip from the start, haven't you? She spat, her voice cracking. Like if you just controlled everything, we'd magically be fine. I'm not controlling anything. The static surged, loud and shrill, making my ears ring. Another voice emerged from the chaos, clear and cutting. It was Claire's voice this time. You're so damn selfish, Jason. You only care about fixing things on your terms. She froze, her face crumpling as if the words had physically struck her. That's from... Her voice faltered, barely above a whisper. Last summer, when we fought about my job offer. That's me. I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but the words died in my throat. The voice came again. Her voice, warped but undeniable, repeating another argument. You want to fix everything, Jason? Why don't you fix yourself first? It wasn't just random noise anymore. It was us. I backed against the counter, my pulse pounding in my ears. What the hell is going on? Claire shook her head, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. I don't know. I don't want to hear it anymore. She turned abruptly and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood alone, staring at the ceiling as the faint sound of static hummed steadily through the boards. A chill ran down my spine as the noise shifted again, and for a moment, I thought I heard the creak of footsteps above us. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to keep me rooted in place, staring up at the locked attic door as Claire's voice echoed through the static once more. I don't know why I ever married you. The days blurred together as the storm outside grew fiercer, burying the cabin in deeper snow. Inside, the static filled every corner, weaving itself into the fabric of our lives. Sometimes it would stop just long enough for Claire and me to consider breaking the silence between us, to talk about something, anything beyond our own misery. But then, the radio would crackle back to life, louder, more invasive, cutting through any hope of reconciliation. At first, it replayed only our worst arguments, twisting the knife with our own voices. But then, it began to pull from deeper wounds, things we'd never said to each other, only about each other. I heard my voice, months old but unmistakable, confiding to a friend, Claire doesn't see me. She makes everything a battle. Not long after, Claire's voice joined in, raw and trembling, speaking words I hadn't meant to overhear. I don't know how much longer I can endure this, she had told her sister during a late-night phone call. I remembered the night all too well. She'd locked herself in the bathroom, and I'd pressed my ear to the door, catching fragments of her sobs. Now, every painful syllable was playing back for us, echoing from the attic like a cruel specter. Every time the voices grew clearer, I saw Claire's face twist, a tortured mix of guilt and fury. We couldn't escape the house's relentless need to turn our words into weapons. We stopped speaking to each other altogether, moving through the cabin like ghosts, subsisting on canned soup and crackers. My calls to the owner went unanswered, each voicemail growing more desperate. Claire's phone signal was the next to fail, leaving her clutching her phone in frustration, scrolling through static-laden screens. By the time she sank onto the couch, tears brimming in her eyes, I knew she was barely holding herself together. I wanted to say something, to reach out, but the words stuck in my throat, drowned by the ceaseless hum of static. It felt like the house was feeding on us, and I wasn't sure how much more we could take. We have to leave, Claire whispered on our 5th day in the cabin, her voice trembling as she stared out the window at the swirling white chaos. Jason, I can't stay here anymore. We had discussed leaving the day before, but the storm had made it nearly impossible even to open the front door. Today, the weather hadn't improved much, but the desperation in her voice was undeniable. Without another word, we bundled up thick coats, gloves, scarves. I knelt to tie her boots, the act feeling oddly intimate, like a flicker of normalcy amidst the nightmare. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if we could reconcile, if sheer willpower could pull us out of this. But stepping outside was like entering a frozen void. The wind lashed at us, sharp as needles, while snow drifts buried the driveway. I clawed at the car door, finally wrenching it open, but the cabin's cold had seeped inside. The engine sputtered weakly, coughing twice before falling silent. I looked at Claire. Her wide eyes darted to the steep, snow-choked road. Even if the car started, we'd risk our lives trying to navigate those icy curves. Defeated, we trudged back toward the cabin, the wind battering us with every step. My fingers numbed, even through the gloves, and Claire was trembling violently by the time I forced the swollen door open. Inside, the now familiar static rushed out to greet us. And then came Claire's voice from above, disturbingly calm. "I'll leave him soon. He doesn't have a clue." My heart lurched. I turned to her, and the look in her eyes nearly broke me. Tears glistened, unshed, as the betrayal registered anew, fresh and raw, even though the words were her own. She shook her head silently and disappeared into the bedroom, shutting the door behind her with a quiet finality. I stood there, snow melting off my boots, my face still stinging from the cold. The static rose again, filling the silence. The cabin creaked as if mocking me, and I could only stare at the dying embers in the fireplace, wondering if anything of us would survive this place. The static wore on, scraping at the edges of my sanity. It unearthed every bitter word, every secret thought we had tried to bury. The cabin became a cage, each revelation another blow to our already fractured relationship. "You're just too much, Jason. Always fixing, never listening." Exhausted and desperate, I found my attention drawn to the attic. The padlock dangled from the ceiling hatch like a taunt. Behind it lay the source of our torment, or at least I hoped it did. I had tried everything to open it, pleading with the unresponsive owner, scouring the cabin for a key. Nothing had worked. "If you're going to stay this distant forever, Claire, you might as well just leave." Determined, I dragged a chair beneath the hatch and grabbed the small toolbox we had brought with us. It was a sorry collection. Rusted screwdrivers, dull Allen keys, but it was all I had. I worked feverishly, each failed attempt heightening my frustration. My hands, raw from the cold, trembled as I forced tool after tool into the lock's mechanism. Hours passed. The light outside dimmed, the day giving way to twilight. The voices continued their assault. "She's going to leave, you know. Can't you tell?" My brother's voice cut through the static. I winced, bracing for what I knew was coming. "Let her. I don't need this hassle any longer." My shame was overwhelming, but I pushed it aside, focused on the lock. Then, as I tried another combination, a memory surfaced. 1-2-3-1. Our wedding anniversary. My fingers hesitated, trembling, before I entered the numbers. The lock clicked open. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by dread. What would we find up there? I turned to see Claire standing in the doorway, her face pale but resolute. Without a word, she approached, her eyes meeting mine in silent agreement. I pulled the string and the ladder creaked down. Dust swirled in the air as the sound of static grew louder. "What are you afraid of, Jason? You're a coward. Just run away from it all. Isn't that what you always do?" With a deep breath, I started to climb. The ladder groaned beneath me, each step taking me closer to the unknown. Claire followed, her silence heavy with anticipation. As I reached the attic, the chill hit me first, a biting cold that clung to my skin. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing it wasn't what I expected. We were standing in our apartment. Not just a replica. Our apartment, recreated with unnerving precision. Every detail was exact. The books on the shelves, the faint crease on the sofa, the barely noticeable stain near the TV stand. It was our home, perfect and horrifying, as though someone had plucked it from our lives and dropped it into this attic. The air felt thick, charged with something malevolent. A metallic scent lingered, sharp and suffocating. My stomach churned as my flashlight settled on the coffee table. My laptop sat there, glowing faintly. Its screen was alive, the cursor moving on its own. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The security app was open, displaying grainy footage from the cameras I'd installed in our apartment. I told Claire they were for safety. That was a lie. The cameras were for me, to replay arguments, to dissect every fight, searching for some vindication in the details. Now, here they were, laid bare, their footage twisting in ways I couldn't begin to understand. I sank to my knees, the weight of my guilt and the impossibility of what I was seeing crashing down on me. Behind me, Claire whispered, "Jason, what have you done?" The static surged again, louder than ever, and the shadows of our apartment seemed to close in around us. The computer kept flipping through clip after clip, each one a brutal replay of the worst things we had ever said to or about one another. It was as if the laptop had compiled a highlight reel of our ugliest moments and was determined to make me watch every second. Megan joined me, her steps hesitant, almost unwilling. Her face drained of color as her eyes fixed on the screen, wide with disbelief. I turned back to the laptop, realizing that it had shifted once more. This time I recognized what was playing immediately. It was our last fight, the one right before we left the house. Megan, would you just listen for a second? It's only 2 weeks. You can handle that. It'll be quiet, peaceful even. Who said I want peace and quiet? Luke? I want my life back. I need to find a job. These surprise trips you keep throwing at me are not fixing anything. So what are you suggesting? Cancel everything? I already paid the deposit, Megan. That money is gone. Or have you forgotten I am stuck in a dead-end job myself? If you want to go on that ridiculous anniversary trip, go ahead. It is always about what you want anyway. You never consider anyone else. I watched as the past version of myself frowned and rubbed my temples in frustration. Megan, I am trying, okay? I am doing my best, but you never let me in. First, it was skipping that job opportunity when we desperately needed the money, and then there was that situation with your ex. I told you nothing happened, Luke. He just stopped by for a cup of coffee. That is it. Megan, do you think I am blind? You turned off the cameras, but guess what? The audio kept recording, you fool. Do not you dare call me a fool after everything I have done for you. I watched her storm toward me on the screen, her anger boiling over. She lunged at me, and I pushed her back, harder than I intended. Her head struck the edge of the table, and she collapsed through it. The version of me on the screen walked slowly to the table. I saw myself staring down as she lay on the floor, gasping for air. Her breathing grew fainter until it stopped entirely, blood pooling beneath her head. I did not rush to help. Instead, I stood there, silent, and then turned away, heading to the bedroom. Moments later, I emerged, rolling my suitcase toward the front door, leaving her lifeless body behind. As if the laptop had decided I had seen enough, the battery warning flashed, critical, and then the screen went black. The sudden silence that followed was oppressive, almost deafening after the chaos. The room was plunged into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the air. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, unable to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I raised my flashlight toward Megan, only to realize she was no longer in the room. The faint metallic scent of blood grew stronger, wafting from the direction of the kitchen. My hands shook as I aimed the flashlight at the kitchen table, a place I had avoided since climbing into this warped attic. There she was, crumpled amidst splintered wood, her body bloated and stiff. Blood, now dried, formed a dark halo around her head. Her neck bent at an angle so unnatural I had to fight the urge to retch. The closer I stepped, the more the metallic tang of blood was overtaken by the sickly sweet stench of decay. Her body was almost entirely gone, nothing more than a shell, except for her eyes. They remained fresh, glistening unnaturally, and they were locked on me, filled with a silent accusation. Megan, I whispered, desperate for some sign she was still in there somewhere. She did not move, did not respond. Yet, those unblinking eyes followed me as I shifted my weight, my breath hitching with every step. The air in the room thickened, growing colder, heavier, pressing in from all sides. And then she whispered. It was faint at first, just a rasping sound clawing its way from her ruined throat. But as I crept closer, the words became clearer, cutting through the silence like shards of glass. You never cared, did you, Luke? It was always about you, your wants, your needs. Her voice was hollow, stripped of warmth, yet the bitterness was unmistakable. I froze, paralyzed as the whispers grew louder, layering into a relentless barrage of accusations. You are selfish, Luke. Always playing the victim, the martyr. Poor you. Each word pierced through me, sharper than the last, the cold biting at my skin as if her words carried the chill. You smothered me, dragged me down. You are a burden, a weight I should never have carried. I staggered back, clapping my hands over my ears, but it was no use. Stop it, Megan. Please stop. This is not funny. Just get up. You fooled yourself into thinking I would stay. I wasted the best years of my life hoping you might change. Her face, so familiar yet grotesquely twisted, contorted as her decayed lips struggled to form each word. The storm outside seemed to echo her rage, the wind howling like a living thing. Unable to bear it, I collapsed to the floor, the cold seeping into my bones. Megan's broken body shifted, the sound of cracking bones filling the room as she moved to keep her dead eyes on me. I crawled in the dark, sobbing, searching for the attic door that had vanished long ago. The floor was unyielding, no sign of an escape. The storm outside faded into muffled silence, snow piling against the windows. Her voice was the only sound left, a relentless, venomous echo. By the time her words began to falter, she was standing, looming over me, her gaunt figure still whispering curses into the dark. Weeks have passed since the door to the outside disappeared. I am trapped here with the thing that was once my wife. Megan, if it is even her anymore, grows more skeletal every day, her eyes sinking deeper, her features sharper. She reeks of decay, but she will not stop. She cannot hurt me physically. She does not need to. Her gaze and her words are enough. The front door is nothing but an ornament, part of this cruel parody of a home. The storm rages on, though sometimes I hear faint cracks in the snow outside. If the windows ever clear, they might be my only way out. I am writing this as both a record and a plea. If anyone reads this, if this somehow reaches someone, do you know when the snowstorm near Denver will end? Is there any forecast for when it might finally let up? It is freezing in here, and I do not think I can keep listening to her much longer.